Okay. Here we are once again. Another week. We're here every Sunday, 11:30 to 1:30, California time. So we'll wait for some people to get in here. Hopefully you guys can hear me. So busy. All right. Let me bring up some comments. Some good comments. Let's see. Anybody in here yet? Nope. A Spanish comment. Okay, so yeah, I posted the mouth posture phase 0 lesson almost a week ago now. Which is probably the single most important and useful pronunciation lesson that you will ever watch, which sounds like a big statement, but go through it. It's important. Working on phase 1 should be done today. I'm really trying to finish it today. Let's see. Not a whole lot of questions recently. We did have a question about understanding the difference between can and can't. Welcome, Aguaz. Good to see you here again. Let me know if you can hear me. Just making sure. I hope so, because otherwise the start of this recording will be very silent. I'll have to cut it out. But yeah, distinguishing between can and can't. It's a common problem. I'll make a video about that at some point, but natives have some difficulty too. It might be surprising to some people, but the difference between can and can't, usually we'll hear the difference, and there's little tricks we use. But there are some times, especially if you're not speaking clearly enough, where I say like, I can't do it or whatever. Let's say I didn't say it clearly enough, and maybe the other person, they're like, can or can't, can or can't, can or can't, and they'll ask that for clarity. So it happens to us too. It's not just for you guys, but usually we don't have that problem. The ways that we tend to make that a little more understandable, the secret trick is, so can will usually reduce either to maybe kin or kun. It could even maybe reduce to ken, or something similar to ken. It probably actually use more of the lazy ah, but that is another possibility I realized recently. But either way, it's going to kind of be maybe a little higher, a little more centered, being pulled into that center of gravity with and so the main point is that even if it uses the lazy ah, it's not a nice clear ah sound. And so if you don't hear a nice clear ah sound, there's a good chance that it's positive, because we tend to reduce it. Now, if we stress the word, we emphasize the word, we say I can do it, then obviously we're just saying the positive, because there's no stop there. There's no anything. We're making sure it's nice and clear. I just noticed my background is a little messy. Sorry about that. But for can't, there are several things we do here. One is that now we have ah. Well, in both cases, we have ah before n, which causes a little more nasal in the ah. Welcome, Jonathan. I'm glad to see you here. Let me know if you have any questions. Hope you're doing well. With can't, we tend to, if you say it nice and clearly, right, we get can't. Like everything is there. It's just we push out that T. That's the easiest way to make it clear. And if somebody isn't sure and they say like can or can't, we tend to say can't, and we'll just push out the whole thing to make it very nice and clear. But usually we don't push that T out unless we need it for that clarity, or maybe we're stressing it or emphasizing it for some reason. I can't do it. Sounds stronger. But One thing that we can do, we know that we tend to stop the T. So McGuaz has a thing related to that. Still struggle with the stop T. So what I do is I say, yes, I can, or no, I can't. That way people can easily understand what I say. That won't always save you. Okay. Number one, you don't want to rely on crutches. Okay. This is a roundabout crutch, right? A crutch is like, say your leg is broken, you have something here to help you walk. That's a crutch. See, because a lot of the time, yes will go with the positive, no will go with the negative. But let's say somebody thinks that you can't do something and you say, oh, no, I can. No, can, positive. Okay. Because you're correcting and they think you can't. You want to say no, positive, I can. So that's not always gonna fix the problem. You need to don't as a temporary measure. Sure, it's fine. But two things. Number one, you also want to be careful with that because if we add yes or no, like yes for the positive or no for the negative, it can actually be a form of emphasis. And if you don't intend the emphasis, then obviously that's not what you want to do. So I would much rather see you just push out the T instead of saying, no, I can't. Just say can't, I can't, and say that T. That's the easy workaround. But the second thing, if you struggle to stop the T, work on your stop T. I know it can be a little difficult or very difficult depending on the individual, depending on your language. But we all have these mechanics, right? Some people, they might have, some physical or whatever issues because their body's a little bit different. But most people, 99% of people, we all have the same mechanics. It's just your language doesn't need to use all of those mechanics. And so you go to a new language and it's like, oh, hey, there's this other part of my vocal tract that I can use, but I've never used it before. So how do I do that? I don't know. You got to figure it out. You got to practice, right? So my top recommendation would be work on your stop T. But as I said, even for us, sometimes when we do that stop T and can't, the other person, if we say it really lazily or the other person doesn't quite hear it, it can cause some confusion even for us natives. So you're not alone there if people don't understand you. It's probably partially a pronunciation related issue on your end, but it could also partially be just the nature of the issue that we experience too as natives. The other thing that we do with can't, before I leave that point, so the safe thing is to push out the T. We don't normally do that. You can stop the T, say can't. Okay. Another thing you can do, especially in faster speech, but you can do this in normal speed speech, as long as it's not too slow, it's not too clearly said. You need to get a little bit lazy, have a little bit of speed with it. You can nasalize the vowel. So this is something I've mentioned in the past couple of live streams where English officially has 3 nasal sounds, m, n, and okay. We unofficially, American English unofficially has some other nasal sounds. We have a few nasal vowels that, as far as I can tell, tend to only be used maybe in certain words or in certain patterns. Can't, don't, and won't are probably the 3 most common cases where we would nasalize a vowel. So what you do for that is you say the k, you say the a, right? But instead of closing up into n, you just make the a go through the nose. Now, because we don't actually have nasal vowels in English, this tells the ears of the listener, hey, there's an N there, even though you're not making an N. So instead of saying can't, you say can't, I can't do it, can't do it. Okay, I'm going into D, so I have to close in that same position. See, I can't see. I can't see. At no point do I close the N. I don't even say the T. You could still add the stop T there. I can't, because that can happen here. You don't have to actually close into the T to stop it. It's the one stop sound that you don't have to do that. But you can drop the N, drop the T, make the add nasal. I can't see, can't see, can't see. And that nasalization, that does not happen with can. Because as before N, a little bit of extra nasal happens. That happens to all vowels before an N. There's a little bit of extra nasalization, but we tend to hear it more with A. I talked about that in the Truth About A before N and M lesson. But can will usually reduce, and we don't even say the A, we change it to a different vowel, where can't, we either will push out the T, have that stop T there, or we'll nasalize the vowel. And those two differences is usually what will allow us to know if it's positive or if it's negative without speaking super clearly. So that's the trick. But as I said, even us natives, sometimes we have a problem with it. Okay, Jonathan, I have a question. If I translate mad and angry, I missed a Y there. There, THEY, apostrophe RE. They're the same word. So what is the difference? Okay, good question. So we have a vocabulary question here. Mad and angry, they're synonyms. They're synonyms. In American English, at least. In British English, mad, I don't know if it can be a synonym for angry, but mad is, I usually hear in British English, mad is a synonym for crazy, like insane, like you're just like, you know what crazy means, I'm sure. So in American English, yes, mad and angry are synonyms. What's the difference? You say, I got mad, I got angry. They're pretty interchangeable. They mean the same thing. Always keep in mind that there's maybe certain phrases that might use one or the other, because there's collocations where words tend to be used together. Like we say fast food, so McDonald's, Burger King, whatever, hashtag not sponsored. We call them fast food, but we don't call them quick food, even though quick and fast mean the same thing, because quick food is not the collocation that we use. It's fast plus food makes that phrase. So there might be some phrases that use mad or angry. Off the top of my head, I don't think so. I can't think of any. But otherwise, they're basically the same. I'd have to look at the etymology to be sure, but English has a lot of words, especially a lot of common basic words like mad and angry, difficult and hard, easy and simple. A lot of words like this and I don't know if mad and angry are part of that group. I'm assuming that they are. But there's a lot of simple common words in that group where we have the Germanic vocabulary root from like Old English, Middle English, Proto-Germanic, which is before Old English, before modern German. English and German both came from Proto-Germanic. So it goes way, way back. And then, of course, we have the influence of Latin words and French words. French had a very big impact on the English language around the 1100s, 1200s. And so modern English has a lot of French and Latin vocabulary. In fact, it's about 60% of our vocabulary is from French and or Latin origin. So hard has two meanings. It can mean like physically hard, like tough, or it can mean difficult. So hard comes from Germanic, because in German, if you say something that's difficult, you say like es ist hot, if I remember my German right, hot, which sounds kind of like hot. I'm not saying hot. There's HART. It's just pronounced in German. I could be wrong about that point. But anyway, the point is, I'm pretty sure hard is the Germanic word, and then difficult, obviously difícil in Spanish. That's the Latin-based word. So we have both of them, and they're basically the same. They're interchangeable. It's very hard. It's very difficult. Okay. There might be a slight difference in feeling, but other than that, a lot of these words are very interchangeable. So I would assume if I look at mad and angry, mad, angry, mad, thinking of Spanish, enojado. Yeah, it's maybe kind of vaguely like angry. I don't know. Maybe angry comes from a Latin root. Doesn't matter. Point is they're interchangeable pretty much. Okay, Andre, welcome. Hello, I have a question. Welcome. Yes, I hope you're doing well. How to pronounce? Yes. Good question. Very question. So, what did and itted? So, the knowledge part here, right? The answer to how, what you need to do is not difficult, but the actual producing, this is a difficult point for many people because we do have to flap that D. I see you have a follow up there. Flap D in words like water 30. Okay, so I'll come back to that. When we say, so for those of you who don't know, yes, you can contract what and it, even what. I'm going to have a lesson on contractions and all this stuff later. You can contract those with more than just like it's, right? It is, what is. So whatted would be what would. And can that also be had? Because the apostrophe D is either going to be would or had. It had been a long time. Yeah, so apostrophe D. So what apostrophe D can either be it would or it had done. So the past perfect. And we have both of those because the words that come after and the context are going to tell us which one. So if I say, what would you like? What did you like? What did you like? That actually sounds kind of like what did. That's another little trick. Sometimes the pronunciation, anyway, is a little trickier than it seems. But what did you like? What would you like? What had he done? What did he done? Okay. Same thing with itted. So if you're listening to me say this, right? What am I doing? What did. So I'm saying, I'm flapping the D. I'm turning the T in what or it into a flap D. Now, why? Okay, well, we know that the number one, of course, there's no flap T in American English. If it's spelled with a T, it always becomes a D sound. So there's only the flap D. That's one of the key sounds for American English, or key features of American English. But we know that in order to trigger a flapped D, whether it's spelled with a T or a D, in order to trigger that and be able to use that flap, it usually has to be at the start of an unstressed syllable. There are some weird exceptions to that in faster speech. Usually has to be at this, we'll just say it does. It always has to be at the start of an unstressed syllable. And it has to be surrounded by two vowels. Well, here we see what and we see it. And there's a vowel before the T, but there's no vowel after the T. Well, this is actually attached to another part of the pronunciation of the language, which is, for example, if I say kicked, or I want to do one that doesn't end in a K, popped, okay, spelled ED ending, but it's just pronounced with a T. The E is silent. It's a T because the consonant before the ED is voiceless. So kicked, popped. Okay. If I say begged or I can't think of the words right now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is now, same thing. The E is silent. So more often than not, like 95% of the time, the E is silent. But the sound before the ED is voiced, so it actually is a D sound. It's a regular D, which you can potentially stop, but begged. Okay. What happens if we have something like, let's see, hated? Okay. Now you can't keep that E silent because, especially in American English, where the T here would turn into a D because it would flap. But even if I really clearly fully enunciate it and keep it as a T, which we can do in special cases, hated, hated. You can't do to d or to or d. There needs to be something between them because as soon as you release it, now you have something between it, and then you have to do it again. So it's physically impossible to do two T's together like that, unless maybe you're between words, like you're stopping one and then you're pronouncing one. But in that case, we're not releasing the position. We go, we hold it, and then we release it for the second one. So you have to have a sound between them. So going back to whatted and itted, the only way to physically do this, whether we do a flap D or not, I could say whatted or itted, possibly, probably not, but it's possible. Regardless of whether we use a T or a flap D, there needs to be something between the end of what or it and that apostrophe D. So you don't see anything in the spelling, but in the pronunciation, in order to make it physically possible to go from that T into that D, we need to put a little sound there. And that could be, most commonly, it's probably going to be a schwa, just a little sound, an actual true little reduced schwa, not a clear or it could maybe even be like an I sound, wooded, would. You got to be a little careful with that because then it can start sounding like what did, with sort of a reduction between the D and did and the flat D for the T. But regardless, you flap that D. We'll just, to make it easy, we'll say you go into a schwa, and then you do that other D, and you can stop that second D. So wooded, 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 or itted, 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 itted. So if you can't flap the D, you can't do that. You got to flap the D first. Once you can flap the D, then it becomes a lot easier. And having the mouth posture in the center of gravity is going to make that a lot easier. That's coming in phase, well, since it's a consonant, part 1 of phase 2, I'm making the phase 1 lesson now. Part 1 of phase 2 is going to be the vowel master class. Part 2 of phase 2 is going to be the consonant master class. So between those two, you'll know exactly how to tie all the sounds into the mouth posture. And it's going to make it a lot easier for you. So that content is going to be coming in the future. Okay. And then following up from that, don't worry, I see you, David. Water, 30. Is it different sound or just have different transition? Have difficulty with pronouncing 30? I was trying to say it using Spanish R, but it doesn't work for me. Yeah, so the Spanish R isn't exactly the same. It's very similar. It's very similar positions, very similar type of mechanic. The biggest problem that you want to avoid, and I didn't realize this until I started playing with mouth posture in Spanish. So in order for me to, because there's a single tap R, which would be similar to the flap D, because we don't, flap the D multiple times. But in order to get a really good Spanish R, especially if you're trilling it, if you're trapping it multiple times, you need to have your tongue maybe a little bit farther forward. You need your mouth a little more closed. The tongue is maybe a little higher, and it's ready and right there. It's so much easier to do that when you have the right posture. If the R sound in Spanish, the single tap usually isn't very difficult for a lot of us, as long as as soon as we realize, hey, we do this with D, which we probably won't realize immediately because we don't think of flap D as flap D. It's just like water. We think of it as a T. We don't even think of it as a D because that's what it looks like. But we do it as a flap D unconsciously. But if I try to use American mouth posture, my mouth is way too open. My center of gravity is centered. And so that's one reason why it's really hard to do the Spanish R, especially the trilled R for English speakers, because they have the wrong mouth posture. It's like, instead of having your hand here to grab something, let's say the thing is here, I could grab it. My hand is here, and I'm trying to reach to grab it, but I don't really have much reach because my hand is stuck here. So to answer this question directly, with water and 30, I don't recommend using the Spanish R itself for the flap D. Again, the mouth posture lessons are going to help as we go along, but for now, it's a decent replacement. But I would play with like moving it around a little bit and trying to produce it slightly differently. However, if you're going, this is a trick. This is an important detail. If you're doing a regular flap D, like what if, okay, it's just a little tap. It's very easy. If you're going from flap D into okay, we do it slightly differently. Okay. Technically, it's a slightly different quality of the same sound. It's not produced exactly the same, but we don't recognize it as different. Instead of going just like that, we're actually going to tap and pull into the because the is right there. And in fact, we'll usually get this very, very light. The tip will kind of be down a bit. The sides, there's the part of your mouth that starts going up, right? So it goes around and it goes up like that, and about here starts going up. We'll take the sides here, the corners, sort of like the corners of the front of the tongue, and those will gently sort of slide along the corners in here of the where the tip might be a little farther down, and we'll just kind of water. So the tip isn't even tapping, where normally it would. What if? The whole thing just kind of hits there. That's a special little trick we have to make it easier to say water or anything like water, cater, whatever. Well, that's not it. That's whatever. You know what I mean? Going into an if you're going from into the flap D, you have to reverse that. So you have to push and tap. So instead of tap and pull, you push and tap. And this is very, very much going to be affected by the sound after. In the case of 30, the next sound is an E, spelled with a Y, but it's an E sound. So you're going to go ri, and you're probably going to hit it kind of like this almost. So it's a little weird. You have to kind of get your tongue to do some weird things. But that's the basic idea. So I would work on getting the basic flap first. If you can do a basic flap D and it sounds pretty good, then work on these other variations. Okay, David, how do you say this thing? Does the S get canceled out? No, in fact, the opposite would probably happen. So if you clearly enunciate, you're going to say the S and the TH. There's nothing special. This thing. And that's fine. We won't always clearly enunciate it that way. In order to make it a little clearer, we might choose to do that. So it's probably the least common option, but it does happen. One other thing you can do is you can say this thing. So you do an S and then you do a dental T for the TH. Very, very common, because remember, the dental T and D will very commonly replace the TH sounds. This thing. In fact, I'm doing a dental D on this because it's voiced. I'm doing this thing. Oh, my tongue is the perfect way. This thing. And at any time, it could go back to a regular TH. I could say this thing. I could say this thing. It doesn't matter. They're just common variation replacements. Whatever comes out is fine. But there is a linking thing that we can do here, and you can say this thing. So it's not that the S would get canceled out, the TH gets canceled out. If you try to say the thing is just it's gonna sound like you have a speech impediment, which means like you can't speak normally or right the way that most people speak. So you don't want to drop the TH there. Anyway, so there's various things that you can do there. Anuwat, welcome. How can I know the common words like thing, thin, and those, or thousand are voiced or unvoiced? What happens to your ear if I mix it? What's your recommendation? Okay, good question. How can you know? You train your ears. For this particular question, if you're having difficulty hearing the difference between the voiced TH and the unvoiced TH, Okay, let's think about it. So we have two sounds that we have difficulty hearing between. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to practice hearing one, right? So let's say you have a random word like thing. You say, okay, is that voiced or voiceless? So you hear the word, okay. And then there's an answer, right? So you look up the answer or someone shows you the answer. And let's say you guess that it's voiceless. And then you see the answer, it's voiceless. You got it right. Okay. Now, if you get it wrong, that tells your brain and your ear, oh, I thought it was voiced, but I was wrong. Okay. These are called minimal pairs. Minimal because there's only two of them. You can do up to three, maybe four, depending, but usually it's two. And it's a pair because it's two, right? So two things with only one change. In this case, voice or voiceless th. So you're going to compare, let's say it's the word thing. You could do this like one at a time, like I just described, where it's actually not a minimal pair. You just get the answer if it's voiced or voiceless. That can help a lot. Or you can have, for example, like there's thing and thing. Now we know that thing with a voiced th is not a word. But if you're having trouble hearing the difference between them, that doesn't matter. You're going to, a minimal pair there would be one option is thing voiceless, one option is thing voiced. And then you hear one of them and you have to guess is it voiced or voiceless. And if you get it right, you get it right. If you get it wrong, that gives your brain feedback to say, oh, okay, that wasn't the right one. And when you do that enough, your brain will start to sort out and be able to hear the difference. It's not 100% foolproof. I don't know all the studies done on this, but I do know from some of my research a long time ago that I came across through polyglot Gabriel Weiner. He talks a lot about minimal pairs and pronunciation. He talked about some research that showed there were linguists who were trying to test the effectiveness of minimal pairs on Japanese speakers. And Japanese speakers, so Japanese doesn't have an L or an R. They have a sound that if you write it in English, we use the letter R, which is very misleading. But it's kind of like a combination between a D and an L almost. And sometimes Japanese speakers will use an L. I'll hear it. Like instead of saying roku, which I don't have a perfect sound there, but instead of saying roku, which is the number 6, they'll say roku. It's just a straight L to my ear, but they don't notice it because they don't have an L in Japanese. So they took a bunch of Japanese speakers and they were having them do minimal pairs like between rock and lock, right? That's a good minimal pair. One has an R, one has an L. And I think they got up to like, it was something like 60 or 80% of the time. I think it was 80. I'm pretty sure it's 80, but like 60 or 80% of the time, they were able to accurately guess which one it was. Where before, when they started, they had a very, very low success rate. Okay. And the linguists stupidly threw this out and said, they didn't get 100%. This isn't a good tool. Well, if you go from 0, if you can't hear the difference between R and L or voiced th and voiceless th at all, or very, very little, and you go up to 60 or even better, 80% of the time you can hear the difference, that's very, very huge. So that's why I say it's not necessarily foolproof, but it's one of the single most powerful techniques for training your ears. I'm going to recommend you do that. I don't think I have a lesson about voiced th versus voiceless th. I might have it on my list. I'll definitely make one of those at some point. But that's going to give you probably the biggest benefit. And then after that, it's just kind of further adjusting your ears through like listening to the flow of speech, trying to pick out the words, identify the sounds. There's other little techniques you can do, but just general exposure also and listening to the language a lot. Once you start training your ears with the minimal pairs, you're going to start to be able to pick it out much more easily, more often. And then it's just going to hopefully improve a little bit more, until you can almost always hear the difference. And a lot of the time, it doesn't necessarily matter if you can hear it, because there's like, as I said, thing is not a word, right? There aren't many words, I don't think, where there are actual real minimal pairs in the language, like thing and thing, one is a word. Thin and then, one of them is a word. That and that, one of those is a word. Those and those, one of those is a word. Thousand and thousand, one of those is a word. Okay, so a lot of the time, as long as you can get the rest of the word, then you can know what the word is, and it's not that big of a deal. Now, the other part of this question that you might have, instead of just with your ears being able to recognize it, you might say, well, how do I know which one to use? Right? Like maybe you never heard the word thing before. Is it voiced or voiceless? Well, the thing is, they're both spelled with a TH. We don't have a way to spell the difference between them. They're just spelled with a TH. That's why they're called the TH sounds. So that just comes from time, exposure. I mean, you can maybe do a little direct study of the most common TH words and memorize which is which. But as long as you learn the word thing, and then you just remember, okay, it has a voiceless TH. Maybe you practice a little bit and you say, okay, thing, the thing I saw, that's the thing, whatever. And you practice a little bit, you listen to it, you spend some time with it, you get used to the fact that that word uses the voiceless one, and then you just know it uses the voiceless one. So even for me, like obviously I'm a native speaker, so I learned from sound first. I already know all of that, but there's no way for me to know just looking at the spelling if it's voiced or voiceless, even though I'm a native. There's no way based on the spelling. It's not possible. So there's no way for you based on the spelling to know if it's voiced or voiceless. I only know because natives learn sound first, which is what you should do also. But natives learn sound first. And so I already know which is which. And then we learn how to spell later. And it's like, oh, we use the same spelling for both voice and voiceless. So, Rodolfo, hello everybody from Mexico. Muy bien. Welcome. Bienvenidos. Okay. How to pronounce the words announce and announced. I have some issues in these words. Thanks in advance and please. Okay. So, well, obviously the only difference here is the last sound in the second one, but for the word itself, announce. So number one, don't be confused by double letters. Okay, it's very, very common for a couple different reasons that English uses double letters. It doesn't make the sound longer. Remember, always focus on the sound, not the spelling. You can't trust the spelling in English. There are patterns, but you can never really trust those patterns. So two consonants in a row, it's not going to be like announce. No, don't make it longer. The first sound is technically it's un. That's where the first N is coming from, but we're going to ignore that because it's announce. So it's a schwa sound. So don't say which is what you might do in Spanish, or a. It's not announce. It's not announce. No, it's center of gravity. Just like in about, around, or the article a reduced to a car. Okay. Then the nounce. So we have N, we have the diphthong ow. Okay, so you need to be able to do that ow. The start of ow is very similar to the Spanish a. The mouth posture is a little different, which creates all the difference in the world. We don't have to worry too much about that right now, but that's very similar. You're going to go from a to, technically you're going into like in book, but the lips come around like an oo, and it sounds kind of like oo. But if you were to do oo with the tongue, it doesn't sound right. It's not a nounce. It sounds kind of weird. A now, ooh. Okay, so I'm using, this is the only time we round the lips for Usually it doesn't have the rounded lips. It's a special combination. So ow, a noun. We go back into an N, and then we do an S sound. Announce. Now, the only difference between that and the past tense with the D at the end, as I was talking about earlier, I don't know if you were here, Rodolfo. Welcome, Finn. But And also welcome Eric and Mr. McValley, and the other person I'm about to get to, Pascal. I don't know. I'm going to finish this up first. As I mentioned earlier, for the ed ending pronunciation, it's pretty simple. If the ed is usually silent. The only time that it's not silent is if there's a T or a D before it, because we can't do T into D or D into D directly. Any other time, with a couple exception words like naked, we do add the sound there. There are some exceptions, but any other time, the rule is that if the sound before the ed is voiceless, the vowel is not pronounced. It's just spelling. It's just an E, nothing there. And then the letter D, what looks like a D, is actually pronounced as a T because the consonant before it is voiceless. So announced, just do S into T. Do not say announced. That is possible, especially if you're really emphasizing the word and you're stressing that past tense part of it. We might do that, but 99% of the time, it's not going to happen. 99.9% of the time, I would say even announced. Okay, so that's how you do that. Announced, 2 syllables. Okay, hopefully that answers your question and is very clear. Let me know if you have any other questions, Rodolfo. How do I make the American placement? When I hear Americans talk, it sounds like they missed a letter there. They kind of swallow the words. Light, deep, back in the throat. Okay. I understand what you're saying. Not quite. So number one, I don't know if you've seen my lessons on mouth posture. I've been making those more recently. I do not like the word placement. Sometimes I will use the term placement. But the concept that you might hear from someone like Rachel's English, where she's talking about like voice placement and stuff, I think that a lot of that is, you're welcome, Rodolfo. I think a lot of that is misleading, inaccurate. There's truth to it. I don't think it's the best way to look at it. It works for some people. It's fine. Everybody's a little different. I came across something called mouth posture, and that's what I've been diving into. It's related. When Rachel's English talks about like lowering your voice, speaking from the chest, which is complete nonsense, by the way. Americans don't speak from the chest. I know what she's trying to do when she tells you to do that, but we don't speak from the chest. She's trying to get you to lower things, and what actually is happening in my experience so far, many languages, which includes German, at least Austrian German, Spanish, Russian. Trying to think. There's another one. I think actually Polish also. Who else am I working with? Anyway, I'm still, as I work with more and more people, I'm discovering sort of which languages do this. But many languages that I've seen so far, your posture, your mouth tends to be a little more closed. That's not always the case. Like in German, it's actually not that much more closed than American English. But the tongue will be slightly pushed forward. And this will feel relaxed to you. This will feel natural because that's the way you hold your tongue in your native language. American English does not have that slightly pushed forward thing. Now, this is relevant because when a channel like Rachel's English tells you, hey, like move everything down and speak from the chest, what she's trying to get you to do is, and I don't know if she's trying to do this specifically, but one of the overall goals in that advice is to get you to not push your tongue forward. And she talks about how a lot of non-natives, they'll tend to have a bit of a higher voice, not necessarily nasal, but just like a higher voice. And the reason why is because if your tongue is pushed forward, it's attached in here and that pulls this up. And so then you kind of sound a little bit like this, where your voice is maybe a little bit higher. Okay. So if you don't push that tongue forward, you let it kind of settle down and back. You're not trying to push it. You get closer to that American posture and your voice will naturally come down a little bit. Now, it's not a guarantee because you can operate the throat and the tongue independently, which is ultimately what I'm trying to train you to do with part of the phase 0 of the mouth posture lesson. 90% of this placement or posture stuff is in the tongue, has nothing to do with speaking from the chest. Now, when you say it sounds like a lot of Americans kind of swallow words, like it's deep back in the throat. And I'll go ahead and give credit to Accent Help because this is where I got this piece of information. So in Scottish English, okay, Scots tend to speak more back here. Also, I think Cockney English, you mentioned that. And American English, some Americans will be a little farther back, but the general center of gravity in American English is the center of the tongue where that is. And it's going to be down a little bit because the jaw's a little bit more open than a lot of languages. So it's sort of middle down. This is where everything moves around. Again, some Americans may be a little bit farther back. Depends on who exactly you listen to. But I mentioned Scottish English because even if all I try to do is just speak from back here, okay, and maybe I try to get a little bit of like a Scottish sound, but I'm not really trying to sound Scottish necessarily. As soon as I do something kind of like this, I wouldn't say that this is Scottish necessarily, but you can kind of start to hear a little bit of something that's maybe a little Scottish, just because I'm trying to keep my center of gravity more in the back of the tongue back here, keep the sounds a little bit more in the throat. By the same token, proper received pronunciation British English is actually also pushed forward, unlike American English. And so if I'm using more of an American English posture and I try to speak with a British accent, perhaps it sounds British, but if I were to speak to an actual Brit, they would probably tell me that I have an American accent. Now, if I just try to shift my tongue a little bit forward and try to sort of speak from up here instead of my normal center of gravity, it's a little bit weird for me, and it's probably not perfect, but immediately, I think, I start to sound a bit better. And even the difference of because when we talk about the schwa, the sound, it's just called the schwa. And the IPA doesn't add any special little thing like it's supposed to do if it's a different sound. If you look at Russian has a schwa, German has a schwa, British English, proper British English has a schwa, American English has a schwa, French has a schwa. Yet you listen to them and they all sound different. They're all very schwa-like. You can identify them, yeah, they're schwa, but they're not the same. They're a different quality. And that has to do with the mouth posture. So that's why in British English, right, when they say like better, right, it's better, better. And they use that schwa sound. They don't say but it's not an American English schwa sound. It's not, if I were to do that, it would be better, 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 instead of better, better, better. I'm trying to sort of like push it forward, slant that schwa a little bit, have my mouth a little more closed. It sounds a little more British. So mouth posture, not voice placement, mouth posture. It could also be if your perception is that many Americans sound sort of like they're swallowing their words, like it's deep back in the throat. I assume you're, getting lots of exposure from lots of different sources, not just a limited, group of people or something. It could be that perhaps if your tongue is pushed farther forward in your native posture, it's creating a little bit of an illusion that makes it sound like it's farther back, but it's actually more central and more open. But most Americans don't speak from back here. If I try to do this and still sound American, I immediately feel like I'm like, I have like a California accent, right? Like this would be that sort of like that, like surfer bro, like, hey bro, what's up? Hang 10. Like keeping everything the same, except instead of speaking from here, I'm speaking from back here. I sound stereotypical Californian, which I am a Californian, and I don't sound like that because I sound neutral. I have general American pronunciation, Western general American pronunciation, which is one of the neutral accents. There's more than one. I have a lesson on that as well. So I don't know if you're just listening to a lot of Californians. That might be the case, but whatever the case is, I don't know. That's what I have to say about that. Back to David. If you have any follow-up on that, you have more questions, let me know. But David, I'd like to do it. He'd left when you got back. In spoken English, you barely hear the D as in I'd or he'd. Can I not pronounce the D? No, you have to pronounce the D. The reason why you might barely hear it is because we tend to stop it. Now, if we're going from a D to an L, that's actually a link. There's a special link we do. So instead of doing D, L, D and L are already close together. They're not necessarily the same place. The L has a range of placement. You can go flat on the teeth. It doesn't matter. But if we're doing I'd like, what we tend to do, well, it might not, probably don't touch the teeth, but it's actually kind of more of like a flatter dental type D without touching the teeth. But because of the context, it doesn't get interpreted that way. Especially because that L, there has to be that L after it for the specific thing I'm talking about. And then the L is already there. The sides of the tongue, because the D, the sides of the tongue have to be out to block the airway. All you do, you keep that position. You let the sides of the tongue come in more into the L shape. That allows the air to flow, and the L is already there. You don't move from the D to the L. I'd like, That's all it is. It's a special link. Now, if you're clearly enunciating, I'd like, you push out the D, then do the L. But regardless, that's a special case. If I'm not going to an L and I say I'd watch it if I had time, I'd watch. Well, okay, D and W you can also sort of link, but I'd watch. We'd probably do some of like a hold stop on the D. And say it's I'd see. That S is kind of right there. We're just pushing that S through that position. I'd see, but I sort of stop that D really quick first, then the S comes out. So the reason why you barely hear it in most cases is probably because it's stopped. If you drop it, if you say, instead of I'd like to do that, meaning I would like to do that. If you say I like to do that, that sounds like you're making a statement of general fact, just present tense. I like to do that, period. You have to have some form of D, even if it's just a stop D. It has to be there. Now, in really fast speech, I like to do it. But I don't have time. Maybe in really, really fast speech, if there's something after it that clarifies the context in that sentence or whatever, maybe you can drop the D in really fast speech. That's its own little world. We're going to set that to the side. Again, that's not just normal fast speech. That's really like fast, lazy speech. Maybe you can drop it. Maybe. So generally, no, do not drop that D. What is the difference between, the difference between cook and fix? Those are two completely different words that are not related. So I'm not sure what the question is. Cook is where you have food and you cook the food. Fix is where something is broken and then you make it not broken. So I don't, maybe like in a context like cook the books or fix the books. Well, fix the books actually sounds like that, maybe the opposite. It could have two meanings. I assume you're talking about more of like a less common special meaning of these words, because I can think that where they might be similar. In which case, very context dependent. Cook in that case means like if you cook the books, right? So there's like a business and I'm actually not 100% sure on the exact meaning, but say you're the accountant for a business, and instead of accurately recording all of the financial transactions, you're sort of like manipulating things and maybe taking some of the money or something like that. You would be cooking or maybe fixing the books. You can fix a sports match if it's fixed, right? Or in voting, right? If people feel that it doesn't matter if they vote because their vote doesn't matter, it's determined by other people that are on the top, which is a common problem. You say like, oh, it's fixed or it's rigged. We wouldn't say it's cooked in that case, so they're not always interchangeable, but it just means that it's the outcome is already determined and there's nothing you can do to change it. So yeah, these are very, very specific meanings, not usually interchangeable, very context dependent, but they do have kind of similar meanings with those uses of those words. Mr. Mockbelly, how you doing? I'm doing fine. How are you? Got a question, got a question, please. For the word forest, is it with a short O, open O, or R-colored diphthong O? Thanks. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to say, terms like short O, open O, short O and open O, or long O, or whatever O, throw all that garbage out. Throw it out, remove it from your brain, delete it from your memory banks. It's a bunch of misleading, confusing, maybe technically accurate, but not very useful terminology. See, and this is actually a good reason why I don't recommend even learning those terms. O is O. Okay. Now the problem here comes from two things. Number one, there's the cot merger. Number two, there's the O diphthong and there's the O monophthong. Okay. And the O monophthong is probably something that you won't really hear other teachers talk about. The cot merger is actually something you don't usually hear other teachers talk about either. But so the cot merger, you probably already know. Many people already know. I've talked about it a lot. If you don't know, really quick, there's the sound ah and aw. And many speakers, in fact, more and more speakers, it's going to become the American pronunciation probably within the next 50 years or so. But many speakers, particularly from the Western United States originally, as well as some places elsewhere, use the cot merger. And that means that ah and aw get merged into one sound back here, ah. It uses the same IPA symbol as ah, the unmerged ah sound. It just shifts back. Aw no longer exists. Now, that's a personal choice. If you want to use aw, you can. The English Hacks recommendation and approach is to use the cot merger. Number one, as I said, more and more people are naturally growing up using it. It's over the last 40 years or so, it's been moving across the country. It's becoming the American way to speak more and more. But number two, it's easier because instead of remembering what sounds use ah, like hot, and what sounds use aw, like I guess caught or bought or whatever, you just have the one sound. It doesn't matter. Hot, caught, bought, they all sound the same. Okay. The second thing is with the diphthong O and the monophthong O. Now, technically in American English, O is a diphthong. Okay. But it doesn't have to be. The way that I teach the O is that because there's the California O, which doesn't necessarily have to sound Californian. In many languages, O is not a diphthong. If I go to Spanish, O, it's just a single sound. Now, the biggest difference is not that it's a monophthong. The biggest difference is that the lips are static. So if you use, now it's not going to be 100% perfect, especially if you have your native language posture. But if you use your native language O, which many languages do it just like that, or something very similar to that. And instead of letting the lips just come out statically, you round the lips around, which American English does. It will immediately sound so much better. So, O, 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 O. Okay, and then you just have to do a little bit of tweaking with the exact position of the tongue, preferably also get the proper posture, and you're going to sound perfect. So you don't have to do the O as a diphthong. Okay, now the R-colored O is a diphthong because we have O plus we're blending two sounds together. That actually is a diphthong in itself. If you do O as a diphthong plus R-color, that would technically be a triphthong. That'd be three sounds. So don't worry about that. It doesn't matter. For the word forest, so you will hear some people say forest. You will hear some people say forest. Okay, it almost sounds like ah, but it's not ah, it's aw. Okay, the people who don't have the cot merger, they have an R-colored aw. Okay, which I'm probably not doing that right because it's not part of my accent, but they have the R-colored aw. Now, so there is no R-colored O if you have the cot merger, at least as far as I know. So what happens if you have the cot merger and you don't have aw anymore? What happens? Well, we don't say R because that's a different R-colored vowel. That's ah plus Okay. So what we do instead is we make it an R-colored O. So instead of saying or, we say or. See, instead of aw, forest, fall, no, O, for, not far, for, forest. So it's a little more closed. It's more in that O position. O, for, forest. And that's all you do. You just do an O into an R, and inside your mouth it changes as the lips kind of come around. So forget all this short O nonsense, open O nonsense. A lot of that is misleading too. Like, for example, I really hate, like, for example, there's like the short A and the long A. No, there's not. It doesn't exist. Okay. There's a and there's A, right? So the name of the letter is A. And if I remember right, that's what's normally called the long A. But that has nothing to do with the letter A. That just happens to be what we call the name of what we name the letter A, but it's a sound. It's a diphthong A. Okay. Same thing. It's not the A sound. It's not an A sound. It's not a short A. It's the sound a. This is one of the biggest problems with pronunciation teaching that bugs me so much, is there's too much misleading mixing of spelling and sounds. You want to completely break that and separate them out, and your life is going to be so much easier and less complicated. You don't have to worry about terms like short O and open O and short A and long A and all this nonsense. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of announced, we forgot an N there. That's okay. Speaking of announced, would you give some examples? Miss an M there. It seems like it might be a pattern. Some examples where natives drop ed verb endings in natural speech. I don't hear it in talk to, like the, finish the. Okay. We don't drop the ed ending. You might not hear it. That is maybe in really fast speech, maybe there's some cases, but generally we don't drop it. What your ears are expecting to hear is something like talked to, liked the, finished the. Okay. But that's not what happens, because we're not going to make a pause between unless maybe we're clearly enunciating or some special case. So, okay, in the case of talked, it's spelled with a D. Don't be led by that. Don't be misled by that. The sound before it is voiceless. It's talked. Then we have another T. What happens when we have two T's between words like that? We tend to stop the first one, pronounce the second one. Talkta. That ed ending is still there in that stop T. Talkta. If I completely drop it, it would be talkta, which sounds present tense. Talk to Tom. He has something to tell you. Now, if I say I talked to Tom, that sounds past tense. If I were to do that present tense and I'm telling you, hey, like, go talk to Tom. It's like, wait, what? You're telling me to go talk to Tom? That grammatically, that doesn't make any sense. So we wouldn't hold that T if it's present tense. So that's how it works in that case. With liked the and finished the, this is also a little bit of a special case, because we have the ability to change the voiced TH in the into a dental D, which is a very common thing that happens. It's not informal, but it is very natural. So of course you're going to find it in natural speech. And so you could say liked the, do T to TH. Probably not going to do that unless we need to make it a little clearer. When you have a T or a D before the THs, and you do that dental variation of the THs, this is the one and only time where you can change the D or the T before it into a dental. Normally, we don't do that. So you can't normally say like, that doesn't work. But if you say like the, so I'm just going straight into here. I am stuck, which I have a lesson on this. I have several lessons on the TH. I have a specific lesson on the dental T and D variation, which you can go watch. And I talk a little bit about the linking too. But I'm keeping that voiceless when I close it, because it's supposed to be liked with a T, like. And then when I release it, I add a little bit of voice to make it a dental D, like the. I really like the part where blah, blah, blah. Now, this can sound extremely similar to like the, and if nothing else, context will make it clear. But we're not actually dropping it. We're not intentionally going from the K into the TH or that dental D. It's just they can sound so similar that it might seem like it's not there. Same thing with finish the. Finish the. We'll also usually use maybe a little bit of a hold before releasing that dental D. That helps to make it a little clearer that it is past tense or something there. So yeah, these are the subtler, maybe a little more advanced type of details that that you don't really learn early on, and that you shouldn't care about early on, because there's a lot more important things that you need to be focusing on at that point. So now that you're at this point, this tells me that you're probably quite advanced, which is good. Okay, thanks so much. You're welcome. Makale's question is so good because the broad transcriptions in dictionaries say it's all, but that's not what I hear in the standard variety of spoken American. Sounds an O sound. Exactly. And that goes back exactly what I was saying. So I already explained all that, but it's going to sound like an O because I don't necessarily know if I can say at this point most people, but I think most people, like probably at least 50, 60, 70% of people probably have the Kakak merger. Obviously, there are older people like my grandparents. Well, actually, my grandpa, who's from California, he has the merger. My mom, who was born in New York but pretty much grew up here, she has the merger. But my grandma, who grew up in New York and spent, up until her, I don't know, 20s, 30s before she moved to California, she does not have the merger. So she says forest, right? But she's also like 80 something years old, right? So there are a lot of older people not from the West Coast that still have this. There are also plenty of younger people. I notice it sometimes in some YouTubers that I listen to. I can kind of tell like, oh, okay, you're definitely not from the West Coast. So there are still some people that, they're not naturally developing it yet, but it is becoming a more and more common thing as it spreads across the country, and more people naturally start using it as the way that they speak. They learn how to speak their native language in American English. So anyway, yeah, you will hear probably most Americans not use aw at all in any case. Lily, hi Josh, welcome Lily. Took me a second to acknowledge you. Sorry about that. I'll see David is here. Welcome, David. And welcome, Cyper. I'm a little bit behind now. We have a very productive time today. Finn retracted a message. Why, Finn? Why would you retract a message? That's okay. Already is pronounced RD in fast speech. I'm already there. Good question. Yeah, so in really fast speech, so remember, already can change into already. You can also drop the L part and say already or already. So in fast speech, really fast speech, yes, you can say it like RD, and you're gonna flap that D. So like, I'm already there. I'm already there. I'm already there. And we don't even notice that we're dropping sounds in there. Or you can change it to O, or, because that's another way to pronounce it. I'm already there. I'm already there. And even when I say it fast like that, like I'm intentionally trying to make sure that I'm not adding those extra sounds back in from the full word, but my brain is still interpreting it. Like I'm like, I'm not adding anything, am I? No, I'm pretty sure I'm not. But my brain is saying, you're saying the word already. So yes, in very fast speech. Variety. What about variety? Oh, got it. It was a correction. That's okay. Good. Yes. Yes. Hello, David. Some people will say there are no nasal vowels in English, but in words like man and damn, do have a nasalized vowel in them. Okay, so no in, say words like man and damn do have a nasalized vowel, or in words like man and damn there is a nasalized vowel. What do you have to say about that? Okay, well, I was talking a bit about this earlier a little bit. So no, there's a trick here. And I've talked about this. I I have a lesson called The Truth About A before M and N. So there's a couple points here. Number one, we have 3 official nasal sounds. Okay, and I know you're asking about vowels, but we have 3 official nasal sounds. They're all consonants. N, and Those are an official part of the language. Nobody would debate that. Okay, that's very obvious. We do have some unofficial nasal vowels that most native speakers are not even aware of. I was not aware of this until a few years ago, and I was talking about an example at the beginning of this live stream with can't, and how instead of pushing out the T or stopping the T, and instead of doing the N, you can do k, a, make the a nasal, like fully nasal, to where it's not like a or eh, it's can't, full on nasal. I can't do it. Can't do it. And usually it's so fast that we don't even notice that it's nasal. But when you nasalize that a, you don't have to go up into n anymore. And you don't even have to push out the T or stop the T. A native speaker, because we don't officially have any nasal vowel sounds, a native speaker is going to hear that. They're going to hear the nasality of the a, and they're going to interpret it as negative, where the positive tends to get reduced and the vowel will change to like I or Now, in the case of words like man or damn, this is not a nasalized vowel. It is a partially nasalized vowel. Any vowel, e, I, a. I don't know about the R's and the L's, L colored, because I haven't thought about that, but any regular vowel, could be O, could be ah, doesn't matter. They are partially nasalized before N. Okay, before N, probably also before M, and probably also before ng, but definitely before N. However, my theory is that this only tends to get noticed in a because the back flap, the velum up here that controls the access to the nose passageway, and what will make it sound more nasal if that's open, that's way up here, and a is way down here, and the physical creation of the sound is kind of pushed forward. And so it creates a very big contrast. If I say a normally with no n or m after it, it's just a. That back flap is either completely closed or like 99, 98%. It could be a very tiny bit open in American English. It's fine. But as soon as I know that I'm going to put an N, or it doesn't matter, anytime I know that I'm going to do an N, I don't do this consciously, obviously. That back flap, that velum, it loosens up a little bit in preparation for the N. Okay. So if I say C, present tense, that back flap is going to be closed or almost 100% closed. E, C, C, E, E, E. You hear going through my nose or through my mouth. E, C, C. There's no interference up here. Now, as soon as I do seen, past tense, okay, add that N, seen, seen, seen. Okay, and it's not that it becomes completely nasal. It's not seen, that would be completely nasal. There's a partial nasalization of every vowel before N. Okay, so when we say ma, a is always a. There are some special things that can happen. Like technically, yes, you can say man as e plus and then go into the N. It can happen in very lazy speech. I don't recommend it. That's how some people teach it. A is a. Okay, and there's the lazy a, which sounds kind of similar to e that most people don't talk about. I have lessons on that. Go watch The Truth About A before N or M. I talk about all that. But the main point here is that you're not fully nasalizing a. If I were to do that, it would be man. Man. That's not what we say. We say man. It's just a little extra through the nose. That's all it is. So we do have unofficial nasalized vowels in special cases, like in can't. Don't, won't, and can't are probably the single most common cases where that happens. There are some other cases, as Finn has helped me figure out. But in cases like man, damn, whatever, these are just normal partially nasalized vowels, just like any other vowel before N or M. Usually M. Anyway. Have you found out what's up with the D in he, does, did? No, dude. Yes, I do. I haven't thought about it. No. In the case of the verb do, I mean, whether it's a main verb or not, it's a super, super common word. So especially in faster speech, flapping it is okay. With dude, that's not do. I don't know. What I do know, right? We're talking about flapping D's that shouldn't be flapped in really fast speech. That's going to be my answer. It's really fast speech. If I say like, nah, dude, nah, dude, nah, dude, and I'm flapping the D, it's just going to sound horrible. But if I'm speaking really quickly, nah, dude, nah, dude, nah, dude, like it sounds better. Again, it's not completely flapped. There's a little bit of solidity to it, as we kind of talked about before. But with do, you could probably completely flap it. Anyway, I don't remember all the stuff we talked about before. But it's a speed thing. It's a speed thing. Wow, your British accent sounds good. Well, thank you. And I thought he was gonna blah blah blah. In fast speech, can you drop the D, drop the flap D in thought and just go? I thought he was gonna. Okay, that's a good question. It's not necessarily that you're dropping the flap D. You're just dropping, because the flap, if it becomes a flap, that's the change. So you would be dropping the T here. That might be splitting hairs, but I think that's useful in this case. Regardless, yes, you're dropping that. Now, in fast speech, yes, that is something I've talked about a little bit about before, like with like would, could, should. You can usually drop that D at the end. You can't do that with any word necessarily, but if you say like, I thought he was gonna, thigh. So it's just A to E. We're even dropping the H probably. Thigh. I thought he was gonna. No problem. In fact, you could probably even do that in normal speech. I thought he was gonna, and it's still okay. It seems to be a weird thing with the T's and D's sometimes. I still don't have that mapped out as to exactly when you can't do that, but I do know there are limits. Can you pronounce depict you as depict you? Wants to depict you? No, definitely not. Wants to depict you. Probably because, so number one, there's going to be a very distinct difference in sound between linking k and y, between versus linking t and y, tia. Or we can even blend it into a ch here, which would also be very common. So that'd just be chew. So that K would stand out. It doesn't sound good. No. I disagree, but yes, in some dialects, oi is closely represented by oi, with the unmerged la vowel making up the first rounded element, and the O might go all the way to, I don't even know. And as I usually pronounce begin as begin. Begin. That's not right. The stress is on the second syllable. If you do that, you're either stressing the first syllable or you're stressing both syllables, which we can't do in a word like this. That's only for compound words. It doesn't even sound like, it sounds like you're making a completely different word, like begin. Sounds sort of like, I don't know if you have, The Walking Dead was very popular for a while. There's a character Negan, so it's an N instead of a B, but it sounds like you're saying Negan, but with a B instead of an N. So no, don't do that. Cyper, do you make that raspy voice on purpose, or is that natural? I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like English speakers have raspy voices. Well, I wouldn't describe my voice as raspy. For sure. Raspy would be like, maybe I'm talking a bit like this, kind of. It's like a little, there's kind of more squeaking. Now, there's something called the, what is it? Vocal fry. Many Americans have a vocal fry. I seem to have a little bit of it. It's not required to sound natural. I don't recommend that you do it. I don't recommend that you try to make your voice sound raspier or fried. There's absolutely no purpose or point to it. If you like how it sounds and you want to throw it in, fine. Something you can completely ignore. I'm speaking the way I'm naturally speaking right now. So yeah, could also be my throat's a little dry. Let's see. Okay, so if I'm speaking now, it does seem like a little bit of that raspiness or whatever is kind of gone. So I've been talking a lot. That's probably part of it. But I'm just speaking naturally. But yes, a lot of American English speakers in particular, not all of them, but it's fairly common to have some sort of vocal frying going on. But I would ignore it. I would completely ignore it. I'd say ow somewhere. Okay, debating topics here or details. Yeah, I'm almost caught up. First part of owl, I should clarify. Okay. Would you say that? Which also, by the way, Eric, I'm going to be making a video in the near future about why I don't recommend the IPA. I know you're using the IPA now. That's why I mentioned it. But I hate the IPA. Boy. Yeah, so exactly. It's not that it sounds that way. It's that it becomes that way. If you don't have the cot merger, just like I was talking about with forest. So if you don't have the cot merger, you have an R-colored aw. If you don't have the cot merger, you have an the diphthong uses aw plus e. Sounds kind of like e, but it ends in e. Oi. Okay. If you do have the cot merger, you don't have aw anymore. So as I talked about with forest, it becomes an R-colored O. But then we also have this diphthong. So if I don't have the start of the oi diphthong anymore, what do? Same change. It becomes an O. So it's oi. Now that being said, I will say, I don't think this usually happens for the or, maybe sometimes, but I do notice that with the diphthong here, the oi or oi, or even just the merger in general. So if I say like hot, instead of merging it, if I unmerge, say hot, people who have the merger will sometimes unmerge. It's a weird thing. I think it's because we're still exposed to speakers who don't have the merger and they use those two sounds. But when we unmerge, we don't notice it. Like I've noticed sometimes in some of my videos as I'm going back and I'm editing and finishing up the video to post for you guys, like instead of saying on, I'll say like on. And it won't be that extreme. I'm kind of trying to make it really clear here. But if I'll notice, oh, hey, I actually said on, I unmerged it. Or whatever it is. That can happen sometimes. So even for me, sometimes you'll hear me say, I don't think it would be so extreme, but you might hear more of like boy, like, oh, I see a boy over there, boy. It might come out a little closer to that oi, but more often than not, usually you're going to hear me say boy, oi. So there's a little bit of variation. There's some weird things, but again, I generally just recommend learning the merger. The or and oi will shift into o as the starting position instead of aw, and then I'm pretty sure everything else will shift down just to ah. So yeah. I have a video reaction request again. Okay. The video is Fire Island meet Cheyenne Parker. Okay. The speaker is from LA, and at 14 seconds he says but drags it out to the point where it sounds like the name Ian. Okay. Fire Island meet Cheyenne Parker. Copy. 14 seconds. Headphones. See, now that's an intentional playing with the language what I just did there. Instead of saying, let me get my headphones, I said, let me get my headphones. I'm intentionally playing with the language. We do that. Okay. I assume it's this one, 14 seconds. Okay, very nice. Let me go back a little bit. Let me hear his general accent. Okay, so this guy definitely has a bit of what I would even call a raspy voice. It's not just a vocal fry. He has something with his throat, which is perfectly fine, perfectly natural. I'm not saying whatever, but there's something with his throat. It sounds like maybe there's like some damage to his throat, kind of, which isn't a natural thing for some people. I'm also noticing he sounds a little bit more nasally than normal. But for when he holds out the word and, okay, the exact sound that he makes, I think, is a combination between what I was saying with his throat and his slight extra nasality. I don't hear him saying something like Ian. I would interpret that as and. I wouldn't interpret that as any other thing. But it doesn't sound exactly the way that you would expect it to sound, that way most people would say it. So I think a little bit with his particular vocal tract is throwing some things off. But as far as holding it out and dragging the word, that is a very common natural thing in American English. And I'm sure I've done it plenty of times. It's a way. This is actually a good point, a general point for everybody here. One of the ways that we give ourselves more time, we have several strategies, right? We can pause. So if I say, like I did a second ago, I said one of the ways that we give ourselves, right? I did a little pause there instead of saying one of the ways that we give ourselves, because I didn't have that thought completely formed yet. So I paused at a natural thought chunk pause, which would be the link between the two clauses. So blah, 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 that, blah, blah, blah. So that's one technique. But another technique that's very, very common is we'll hold that word to fill that gap instead of pausing. Or it might even be a syllable, like the last syllable. But it's super common with and. So if I say, so yesterday we went to the beach, we had a lot of fun, and yeah, it was just a good time. So I don't know, I'm thinking, anything else. I'm saying, and I got nothing. So I just say, well, it was a good time. Yeah. To sort of put a period at the end of my thought instead of just ending on and. But yeah, it's a common technique. I'd send this with a typo. Oh, I'd sent this with a typo. So I'm sending it again. Hot take. Oi and O don't have the exact same starting vowel, and I and ow don't either. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Okay, good. So I misinterpreted what you were saying there, Finn, which there's a reason for that, by the way. But okay, so your hot take first. You are accurate. You are correct. Yes. Doesn't matter. No. As long as you have the correct posture. If you don't have the correct posture, then you might run into some trouble. Not guaranteed, but I think the posture might throw things off because we're talking about diphthongs, and the posture is super important for diphthongs. Jet going over. So basically, that's getting loud. You guys actually probably don't hear that because I think this mic has pretty good pickup for things that are closer, not farther. But okay. If we're going to get very, very technical, which I'm going to be talking about this when I talk about the diphthongs for the mouth posture in the Vowel Masterclass. So I'm going to cover this topic, don't worry. But this has come up before. When we say O, obviously, right, there's the diphthong O, which isn't even going to start in that position. Anyway, it's going to actually probably start more closer to which is part of the posture. But regardless, the position where that O is, whether it's monophthong or diphthong, it would kind of be like maybe around here. O, right? Somewhere in here. And then for oi, it's actually probably going to be maybe around here. It's going to be a little bit lower, perhaps. What are you drinking? Oh, Monster. Hashtag not sponsored. I shouldn't, but I am for the time being. Hello, Nazrul. I'm in the middle of answering a question here, so let me know if you have any questions, Nazrul, and I will get back to you. But yeah, welcome from Bangladesh. Very good. So the exact position is a little bit different. The posture is the same. They're so close together that, I mean, if you really, really listen, obviously, if I make a very, very small change and your ears are really, really good and you're paying very close attention, you can notice that there's a difference. But does that difference actually matter? Does it cause something? Does it sound like a different sound to the ears of a native speaker? No, it doesn't. Because our brains filter out that small little difference. Okay. Same thing with I and ow. It is, I would say it's the same sound. It's placed slightly differently. But part of the trap here, there's different ways to look at this. I may have explained it differently before. I don't know. But one of the traps here for sure is you have to be careful, because if you're going from ah to I or ah to what is with rounded lips, even if you start in the same position, immediately, because it's a diphthong, immediately it's going to start sounding different. And that's one of the traps, because you notice, oh, hey, this one seems a little bit more this way, this one seems a little bit more this way. Well, maybe because they have different paths of travel. So that contributes to the problem. But this is a particular detail that, although I am going to mention in the master class, because I'm going to try to mention not only building it into the posture, but I'm going to try to mention every little thing that I can think of for every single vowel in the vowel master class. Why? Why are you traveling over me? There are some things in the original vowel lessons that I posted, some of my very first videos, because that's where I started. And I gave you guys lots of good information. Since then, there are some other things that I've learned about certain sounds and this and that, or that I've realized, and I'm going to include all that extra information too. So it's going to be a true masterclass plus building it into the posture. So I'm going to mention that for the sake of completeness, but it's a point that I think you should pretty much ignore, because it's this is a case of hair splitting that I don't think is important. Some hair splitting is important. This one I don't think is. Okay, so you're saying when you say begin, yeah. See, I just did it right there. So when you didn't write the stress, right, you just put BEEGIN. My brain jumped to, okay, you're stressing the first syllable. And there's a reason for that. When we have this, I'm not typing. When we have this prefix, it also happens a lot with D or re. There's various ones, but when it's these little prefixes in a lot of words, the full, clearly enunciated way to say them is with the sound E. Okay, so begin. The stress is still on the second syllable. Begin. Decide. I don't know, remake. Okay, remake. Can we remake? Yeah, remake. Okay, just as examples. However, this usually gets reduced so much so that I'm pretty sure the dictionary doesn't even tell you the E pronunciation. I'm not sure on that. But like 99% of the time, probably, we don't say E. It can come out that way. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's extremely common that it'll get reduced to I. Okay, so we'll say begin, decide, remake. Okay, with the ri, it's maybe a little less common to become I. It'll probably go into the second reduction. These have two reductions, two possible reductions. This is a good example of words that have more than one possible reduction, where we can reduce, of course, to the center of gravity, the schwa. So you can say begin, not be, not be, but begin. You can say decide. You can say remake. Okay, I have to remake it. I have to remake it. I have to remake it. Now, when we add re to, how do I even describe that? Like, obviously, remake is a word, but we're sort of adding the re on there specially. It's not necessarily like a core part of the word. Like in be, it's not being added. It's part of the word, but it's still a prefix. Or like in decide. So let me see if I say, like record. Okay, that's a good one. So record, which this is, of course, as a verb. Record, record, record. Okay. So the E version of these is sort of the extra clear, fully enunciated version. It can always come out that way. There's no problem. As I said, more commonly, it's going to reduce to it or It doesn't matter which one you do. So you're perfectly fine with that. If you say it with E, you're okay. It's probably gonna, if you just say it once, right? Like you just need to use the word once in whatever you're saying. I really doubt that it's going to stand out at all. But if for some reason you say that same word, say 2 or 3 times in the course of a few sentences, it's going to start standing out. Because as I said, more often than not, we don't use the E, but it's fine if you use the E. So because of that, if you keep saying begin, 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 it's probably going to start standing out. So that's the only thing I would say about that, but you should generally be fine with that. It's technically accurate. Eric, about endings, ing sounds. I hear some speakers say like, God, I hate the IPA. Interesting. That's definitely not right. So with an ending like eng, unless I'm pretty sure I'm not reading that wrong. Should be the a diphthong plus ung. Thing, think. Well, with think there would also be. See, I'm saying it the wrong way. With think there would also be a k added after the ung. Otherwise, it's just ng thing. This is it. Okay, I don't want to say this. I know this exists for the word thing, but if this exists for thing, and if it exists for other words, it's a regional thing. It's a regional thing. It's not a standard thing. Because I know for thing, there's actually several regional or playful ways to say thing. One is with saying thing, which could alternatively, instead of a, it could be a thang. Ain't no thang, ain't no thing. That is regional and or playing with the language. Is not standard. So I would completely ignore that. 100% ignore that. Can you laugh and sneeze with a foreign accent? What? Okay, sneezing. I didn't know that different people sneeze. I mean, obviously everybody sneezes a little different, but I think that's an individual thing. I don't think that has anything to do with your language. Laughing, I mean, theoretically a different posture would affect some things, but laughs are also highly individual. People laugh in different ways. So I don't think that, maybe it has some subtle impact, but I think that, yeah. Interesting question. But I'm going to say it doesn't really matter. I pronounce it in a similar way. I think of it as a sound, but now hearing it kind of sounds like a. Your comment makes me think about a study that says that babies cry with an accent. I encourage you to read it. It's very interesting. Now that makes sense. That I think would be evidence for developing a developing mouth posture in babies, because which that makes 100% sense to me. I mean, I guess I'd have to read the paper myself to see all the details and conclusions, but that fits right in line with my thinking, because what babies do, they're exposed. We'll keep it simple, just say one language. You know, you can be bilingual, but you're exposed to your native language. You're getting lots of input for the sounds. You start playing, right? The little sounds that babies make. They're not just making sounds, they're actually figuring out how to make the sounds that they hear. I mean, they're probably also making some random sounds too as they're figuring things out or whatever, trying to express themselves. But they're largely trying to figure out what they're doing in order to produce what they're hearing. It's an instinctual thing in humans so that they can communicate, right? And it would make perfect sense to me, especially if my theory is correct, that the center of gravity in the mouth posture is sort of like the core of the accent, that everything else revolves around. It makes sense that, like we know, for example, T is a common sound in many languages. E is a common sound in many languages, right? So we have a consonant, we have a vowel example. But you listen from language to language, T's tend to sound slightly different. Some of them are more dental, like in Spanish, t. Some of them are sharper, like in English, in American English at least, t. Probably also British English, better, yeah. The E, right? E sounds very similar across languages, but if you listen very closely, there's usually very slight little differences. It doesn't sound exactly the same. And I already mentioned the schwa earlier, how it uses the exact same IPA symbol. There's no modifications to the symbol, which is one reason why I don't like the IPA. It's not the same quality of that sound across several different languages. So it makes sense to me that when babies cry, that they would have an accent because they're building that mouth posture. Now, I would be surprised if, like, as soon as they're born and they start crying, say you have like an Italian baby and a Japanese baby and I don't know, a German baby, and they immediately have the accent, I would be kind of surprised by that. But we also know that you're getting some input before you're born from what you can kind of hear outside. So that, I think, could still be kind of maybe a little explainable, but that would be very interesting. And I wouldn't be quite sure how to explain that. But say if you're like a month old or 2 months old or older than that and you cry, having an accent in your cry is not surprising to me. That just makes me feel stronger about this whole mouth posture thing as something that's accurate and true. What's the name of that paper? Because I can try to look that up, or a study. But anyway, I guess I still find it peculiar, for lack of a better word, how some speakers go and others maintain a. Training, life, and giving is a good example of a different extreme. 35 seconds. Ugh, I have a plate here. It's in the way. Okay, so to clarify, David, because I'm seeing you write E, I'm interpreting that as E and. I'm not hearing him say E at all. Maybe a little bit. Maybe. And I think what he's doing there, it's kind of a mix between, it's actually kind of hard for me to hear because it seems like he's on the line between and like the lazy and then he's getting a little bit of a schwa in there, so he's doing that sort of to type thing, or lazy to type thing. I'm also hearing, I wouldn't say he has an accent necessarily. He sounds quite neutral to me, but some of the way that he makes certain sounds, it does sound, I'm not even sure how to describe it. I don't even want to call it regional. It's a little off. Like generally neutral sounding, but a little off on some things. And the way that he says "and," just the word "and" without like holding it, is one of those things. I think it's his sound is made very slightly differently. So that would be my analysis there. But David Bowie, back from the dead, awesome. David Bowie, welcome. I have difficulty in the word sincerity. The end of the word is T flat and the R is flat too. Okay, so the question is about the word sincerity. I don't know what you mean by flat. That doesn't make, like, for the T that makes some sense because there's like how flat the tip of the tongue is, but for R doesn't even touch anything, so I don't know how flat could apply to R. So if you can clarify your question, I can maybe answer that. But I will say for the word sincerity, so there's an so it's an R-colored air. Could also be air, that's fine, but air. And then we're doing a flapped D. It's not even a T, it's a flapped D. Sincerity, itty, sincerity. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, but feel free to clarify, reword that a little. I'm not sure what you mean by flat. Delio, hello, welcome. So late. Yeah, we only have less than 15 minutes, so that's okay. Welcome. Better late than never, as we say. We're laughing in foreign accents. Yeah, exactly. I know it doesn't make any sense, Delio. Just go with it. Just go with it. No, yeah, like the first vowel sound in O is closer to a schwa, and the first vowel sound in oi sounds more like the first vowel in or. Yeah, well, the thing about O, so when I talk about the diphthong and the monophthong, and I try to teach you guys the monophthong to make it easier and simpler, because it's still going to sound good if you get the lips rounded, maybe make a little adjustment here. It's going to sound perfectly fine. But it is very common for American speakers to do, especially if you're not from California, to do, it's not that it starts in right? And I think, yeah, you said closer to a schwa. It actually starts, and this again is further proof of the center of gravity and the mouth posture. So we don't say oh, right? That would be full on schwa. But it actually does kind of, it tends to start slightly in the schwa, a little bit behind it, and then we just move into that position back there with the back of the tongue as the lips come around. So it's this like circular motion. Oh. It's a very common way to make the O in American English. I'll also be talking about that in the masterclass. In ow, the first vowel is somewhere between a and the first vowel in I. So when there's an N, I need a space there. If there's an N or M after it, the first vowel in ow becomes a nasalized lazy schwa. Also, unlike with the I diphthong, you can reduce this diphthong to when you don't think cutting the diphthong is enough. Okay, well, let's test that. Let's see. Somewhere between a and the start of I. So if I do I, ow, I, ow, 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 I. Okay. What I'm noticing, I'm not moving anything. I'm keeping the front exactly where it is. There's a very, 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 very slight, subtle shift in the tension of the middle of the tongue. I is perhaps, relatively speaking, a little flatter or pushed forward, relatively speaking, compared to ow, where ow feels like it's just very slightly pushed in a little bit. Other than that small difference, I notice no difference between the sounds. So I'm definitely not trying to place the vowel between a and I, or the start of I. That's for sure. Now, if there's an N or an M after, it becomes a nasalized lazy schwa. Okay, so let's see. So if we have like ow plus, okay, like gown, gown. So if I say it nice and clearly, no. Gown. Now you're gonna maybe hear it pass through or near the schwa because that's the effect of the center of gravity. That's why it's called the center of gravity. It pulls it into it, and we usually either pass through it or near it. But if I say gown, gown, it's definitely not nasalized. That's for sure. If I were to nasalize it, it would be gown, gown. That just sounds like there's something in my mouth or something. A lazy schwa, I guess you could describe it as a lazy schwa, kind of, in a way. It's definitely closer into that center of gravity. If I'm trying to say ow before N, sort of in a very lazy way, I'm not clearly enunciating own, then yes, what you're describing minus the nasalization does seem essentially accurate. Also, unlike with the I diphthong, you can reduce this diphthong to ah. I highly doubt that. Let's see. So let's see. Let's see if it works with now. Nah, nah. I don't say that's possible. At least not if it's the last sound, because if instead of saying now, if I say nah, that's not the word now. Maybe if there's something after it, if I say gown, but I change it into if I say gan, no, definitely not. So I would disagree with that as well. I don't know if you can give me some more examples or some more clarification, but most of that I would disagree with. Perhaps in other parts of the country, in some of the other neutral sounding accents, stuff like that may happen, but in the way that I speak, definitely not. And maybe, again, really fast speech is its own little thing. I'm not as conscious of that. So maybe in super fast, lazy speech, something like that could happen. But it's also kind of hard to slow that down and isolate it. But in normal speech, I would say no, for sure. Some Canadians don't have the raising in so they'll pronounce words like hand, can't, and the British way. Yeah, that can happen too. Remember the raising in for those of you who don't know about the raising in watch my lesson about the truth about before N and M, because I talk about the raising there. The raising is it can happen before N and M. It can happen not before N and M. It tends to happen more before N and M than otherwise, but the raising to any degree can happen at any time. So yeah, and there are probably some people or some, dialects or regions that tend to have more raising or less raising than others. And so some Canadians would tend to maybe not have any raising at all. And then they sound a little more British. Okay. This was a charged comment, but I find little nuances in diphthongs very interesting. Yeah, little nuances exist. They just don't always matter. So I'm not crazy after all. You interpreted the E in and correctly. That's what the first guy's pronunciation sounded like to me. The second doesn't have a hint of that tense E coloring at all. It's just the and. Thank you for checking the videos. Yep. No problem. Yeah, if you can get an American accent, it's not that hard to get a Canadian accent. You just have to learn like the couple little differences. Some Canadians do have what we would call a Canadian accent. Many Canadians, I think especially from the western side of Canada, they sound almost exactly like I do. So much so that many linguists, I don't know if I can say many linguists, but I know some linguists want to include Canadian English under the umbrella of General American. So yeah, there are differences, of course, but not all Canadians sound Canadian, stereotypically. The first time you said sincerity, I heard it more of a D than a flap. I perceive them as being different sounds. In that case, does it work using more of a D than a flap? With words that have this final vowel plus TY, I mean, by the way, which glide do you use in audio on small W or small y? Okay. So if I say sincerity, it sounds kind of weird. And the reason why, there's one little trick. It's not a big point, but it is something that you have to be aware of. Remember, American English pronunciation is a range. We have slow, clear, enunciated speech or emphasized speech. We'll dip into this when we need it. We don't talk from here usually. If I were to do that, I would say everything like this, and I would sound very unnatural. Okay. Then we have the normal range. There's a slower end of normal. It's a little more enunciated, not quite as fast, but it's still normal. And we have a faster end of normal, which is a little faster, a little lazier. But it's all, this is where a lot of the linking happens. This is where a lot of the normal things that you guys learn about. That's where most of this happens. Then there's super fast speech where things just kind of go crazy and break down and weird things happen. And I mean, a lot of the basics are largely the same, but strange things happen on top of that. When we're talking about the flapped D, so remember, just to clarify for people who weren't here earlier, who haven't heard me say this before, there is no flapped T. I hate when teachers call it the flapped T because, again, we're tying the spelling and the sounds together and it's misleading. It's inaccurate. There is no flapped T, okay? If it's spelled with a D or it's spelled with a T, if we have the right conditions, meaning that it's at the start of an unstressed syllable and there's a vowel before it and a vowel after it, then that triggers the ability to flap, okay? Now, if it is spelled, and it's the same sound, whether it's spelled with a T or a D, it's voiced. It's just one sound. There's no difference in the sound, so there's only a flap D. There is no flap T. Now, if it's spelled with a D, if it's supposed to be a D sound, okay, then if you slow it down or you say it more clearly, then you should push out a D, not a flap D, a D, okay? Because the flap needs a certain amount of speed within that normal range, even the slow end of normal, the flap is possible, but it's really hard to go, like I can say duh, but I can't really do duh. It just doesn't work, right? Because you have to tap it quickly. So when we slow down enough or when we enunciate enough, if it's spelled with a D, if it's supposed to be a D sound, you'll push it out as a D, regular D. Probably it's going to be a weak D because it's at the start of an unstressed syllable, but it's a D. Okay. Weak, again, for those of you who don't know, is unaspirated. If it's spelled with a T, like it is here, okay, this is the one case where the spelling actually is a little important. If it's spelled with a T and you slow it down or you enunciate more, it does not stay a D, okay? Because both the T and the D will turn into a flap D. There's no flap T. We don't say ha, ha. Okay, it doesn't work. But when you slow it down or enunciate it more, it turns into a weak T. Sincerity. Sincerity. Okay? That's the one trick that you have to be aware of with that. Now, usually that's not really a big deal because we don't tend to slow it down or enunciate it, clarify it on that particular syllable when we would flap what is written as a T. It usually doesn't happen. But the exact same thing happens with written or Britain, Latin, right? This case where we can do the stop plus the n, what is it called? Syllabic N or whatever. Mountain, right? Same thing. Now this has nothing to do with the flap. This is with the glottal. If you slow it down and you enunciate more, written, Britain, Latin, right? You're enunciating more. You're slowing it down. Whatever it is, you're making it clearer or emphasizing it. It reverts back to that T. So we're just following that same basic guideline and rule of more fully properly pronouncing it, except in this case, we have the special extra case of something that's written with a T will become a flap D. So that's sort of an extra step where it seems to change into a D sound. Technically it does. But if you go back to the full clear pronunciation, it is a T. It's a weak T. But normally you don't want to say it that way because, again, that's the special case. That's slower, more clearly enunciated. It should be a flap D. Okay. But definitely do not do a normal D there for sure. That would sound a bit weird. With words that have this final vowel plus T. Yeah. So, and it doesn't matter. It would apply in all cases. I guess maybe it depends on exactly what's behind the TY, because if there's no vowel behind the TY, it's not going to flap in the first place because we need that vowel before it in order to trigger the flap. But otherwise, if there's a vowel before it, it will always work the same. Which glide do you use in audio on? Okay, so let's think about it. Audio on, audio on, audio on, wah, wah, wah. So anytime you go from an O, an oo, or an ow, okay, these all round the lips around. However much, if we're speaking a little faster, then we won't round it completely, but they do have this basic motion. It's not all the way into a W. That's why I call it a small W. But anytime you go from oo, o, or ow into another vowel, it's going to be a small W because that's what the lips are doing. There's no O and ah have nothing to do with y. So why would I bring my tongue up into y between the two? I wouldn't say audio yawn. Audio yawn, audio yawn. No, that sounds like I'm saying audio plus, not typing. Yawn, audio yawn. That would be a completely different thing. Okay, we are out of time. I'm going to finish up the last couple things we have here. Okay, you say yourself though, there's even a video of you saying you can reduce how to and fast speech. Yes, okay. Number one, fast speech. As I said, maybe in fast speech. The other thing to keep in mind is there are some, like, say, for example, get. Okay. Get is supposed to be get. It's a stressed word. Stress syllables usually do not reduce. That's uncommon. Okay. And yet we have get turning into, or sorry, yeah, get turning into get. It's reducing. Why? Because it is an extremely common verb, one of the most common verbs in the entire language. That doesn't mean that just because it's super, super common, it's going to reduce, but that is what one reason why it might happen to a word, because it's such an extremely common word that we use all the time, and it's a little bit faster and easier to say get than it is to say get, right? So that's what happens. Now, in the case of how is also an extremely common word. So if I say, how'd it go? Ow, how'd it go? How'd it go? How'd it go? You can either just cut the diphthong, or you can maybe push it a little bit into ha, how'd it go? How'd it go? That's fine. Or ha, not ha. Ow, 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 how'd it go? How'd it go? How'd it go? That's fine. Either way is okay. But again, fast speech. That's the key there. With get, you don't necessarily have to go fast, so it's not always fast speech, but get is also a very special case. We know get is very special in many ways, which is going to have a whole chapter devoted to itself, probably a very long chapter in my next book that I'm going to be starting here probably next week. That's going to be fun. Which I already know the logic and feeling of get. I already mapped that out with some students before, so it's going to be relatively easy to write that chapter. But you guys are going to be like, wow, that's amazing, because it's all going to start making sense. By nasalized, I mean slightly nasalized. That happens because of the M. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I said ow has a slightly nasalized lazy ah. There's an M right after it. Was it ah or I don't remember. Okay, whatever. Okay, so ow like gown. Ow, 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 ah. And gown. Okay, as long as you bring those lips around a bit, possible, yes. If you don't bring the lips, if you're just doing and the lips aren't involved anymore, it's not going to work. You need to have the lips for ow, even if it's just a little bit. You need to have the lips for ow. Otherwise, it's not the sound. Can you pronounce the wanna in what do you want to do as wanna instead of wanna? What do you want to do? Yeah. That's a possible reduction in faster speech. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Maybe in normal speed, maybe. It doesn't sound too bad. But in fast speech for sure. Have a great day. Take care. No problem. Make sure to practice laughing with a foreign accent. Ha 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 ha. Ja 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 ja. I always read that as ja 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 ja, and it's a Spanish way to write it. But yeah, but you can never reduce I to a. Not even in fast speech. It sounds weird. I don't like that. 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 Works for me. If I try to say I don't like that, and I say it as instead, I don't like that. I don't like that. Sounds okay. It is a little bit different, but if it came out that way, I don't think anybody would notice. The start of I and ow, that vowel, and the sound, they're very similar, at least to an American speaker's ear. And their placement is pretty close too. So when we're cutting the diphthong in fast speech, it's possible. Yeah, of course, I was talking about the first vowel. Okay, yeah. Lips around for sure. There's no way that it could. Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. I forgot we were focused on the first vowel, not the whole sound, because I perceive ow as, I know it's a diphthong, it's technically two, but I think of it as like one sound because I'm a native speaker. It's just the ow sound. Okay, good. Anyway, so we're out of time. Thank you very much. Busy. This was a good one. I was talking the entire time. So as I said, mouth posture lesson. I made a community post recently, a text post for those of you who didn't see, before I go really quick. Current plans. Been working on mouth posture. I'm currently editing the phase 1 lesson, which is jaw and schwa. Redoing that phase 1 since I sort of moved some things around. So that I'm going to really try to finish that tonight. I have quite a bit to do. I'm probably going to be working on it like most of the day. And I have something special this evening that I have to do. So if I don't finish it, I'm definitely going to finish it tomorrow. But I'm working really hard to finish that one. For the phase two part one is the vowel masterclass. I've gotten with some people, I've gotten into phase two. Because I'm still testing, I'm still building things. I know the idea works, but I don't want to present a lesson to you guys until I have a really good core base with like, you know, different techniques, different exercises for you. So I'm going to wait to do the master classes in phase two until I work with enough people and get far enough through phase two and get some people into phase three. So I can feel really good about what I'm going to present to you guys, and then I'll make those lessons. So there's going to be a little delay between the phase one and the phase two lesson or lessons. They will be coming. In the meantime, after I post this phase one lesson, I still have some videos in the main pronunciation course that I was supposed to finish by the end of this month, but I ran into the mouth posture stuff and threw me off course. So I'm going to take that time to try to finish up the pronunciation course over the next month or so. The main pronunciation course. And as I mentioned briefly a little while ago, I am starting a new book at the beginning of this coming month about essentially I don't know if I'm going to call it the logic of English verbs, but it's the same idea that I use for the prepositions, but applied to verbs, because I know it's going to work there too. And so that I'm going to try to write that book in 3 months, because I want to write 3 books this year. First 3 months are gone. 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. We have 12 months total. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. It's a little ambitious, but that's the plan. So I'll be working on that while I finish the pronunciation course. And then if I haven't reached a point where I want to be with the phase two lesson yet, I'll start making, I have like some extra practice lessons and some other pronunciation stuff I can continue to make to fill in until I reach that phase two masterclass lesson for the vowels. So it's all coming. That's the current plan. And you can expect a new book from me, hopefully within the next 3 months or so. And we'll see where we are at that point. Are you going to talk about how the center of gravity affects each vowel? Yes, that's I originally had the idea for the vowel masterclass. I think actually one of you guys, Jose Ozuna, if I remember, I think he gave me the idea, but I originally had the idea to just make a vowel masterclass, and I actually recorded that lesson, but it didn't come out very well, and so I kind of scrapped it, and I was going to redo it, and I never got around to redoing it, which is a good thing, because then I found the mouth posture stuff, and I'm like, oh, I can actually put these two together, make the vowel masterclass plus the mouth posture. So the phase two part one lesson is going to cover all the vowel sounds: monophthongs, diphthongs, R-colored vowels, L-colored vowels. It's going to be a very long lesson. It's going to probably be at least an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe even longer than that. It's going to be a true master class, and I'm going to give you every detail that I know of and that I can think of for every single vowel, related to the spelling, different ways to like how it feels in the mouth, this, that, whatever, how to build it into the posture or build it from the core posture. That's why we learn the center of gravity in phase one, setting the jaw so that all that's in place, and then you can start building the sounds on top of it. So it's not just how the center of gravity affects it, but one of the approaches that we're going to take in that is how to better find and build it from the center of gravity. But we're going to be talking about how the center of gravity affects each vowel in the consonant master class, which is part 2 of phase 2. We're going to talk about how it affects each consonant and how to build that into the posture. When we get to phase 3, we're going to start doing moving between sounds, going into syllables and words, and how the center of gravity is affecting all the movement from sound to sound to sound to sound to sound, because it's always in there. So like literally you can see from phase 0, where we're just sort of figuring out how to like control the tongue and become more aware of what's happening, all the way up through the sounds, through the syllables, and the words in the sentences. I'm literally taking you step by step from ground zero all the way up to the language as a whole, and how to get that center of gravity into your pronunciation. So yeah, it's going to cover everything. And I think you guys are really going to like some of the techniques in phase 2 that I've already been developing. They're not going to be easy, but they're kind of fun. They're almost kind of like a game. So anyway, I do have to go. Thank you guys very much. That's the plan. I'll see you next week, same time, 11:30 Sunday, California time, 11:30 a.m. And have a great week, everybody.